Hi, it's Victoria, Girlboss's executive editor. Are you a Broadway fan? Do you live in New York City or are you planning a visit during the holidays? Then you have to check out Suffs the Musical before its Broadway run ends on January 5th, 2025. Suffs is a Tony Award-winning musical about how American women fought for the right to vote, and it's playing right now at the Music Box Theater. Okay, picture this. Fierce women from the suffragist movement who called themselves Suffs for short, taking the stage to share their stories. It's a vibrant blend of passion, friendship, and the fight for equality, all set to moving music that'll be stuck in your head for days. It's a celebration of sisterhood and resilience that feels both timeless and more important than ever. If you're looking for a night out that's not just fun, but also deeply meaningful, Suffs is your show. Our social media specialist, Cheska, actually went to see the show a few weeks ago, and she even said she got teary-eyed at how powerful the performances were. So if you find yourself in NYC before January 5th, 2025, don't miss this chance to be a part of something special. Get your tickets at suffsmusical.com. That's SUFFS musical.com, and learn about the incredible women who gave you the right to vote. Trust me, you'll walk away feeling like you can take on the world.
This episode is brought to you by the 6 app. Welcome back to another episode of Girlboss Radio. I'm your host, Avery, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Bloom, an HR and DEI consulting firm, and I am a big believer that work should work for all of us. Today's guest is proof that nonlinear career journeys can lead to incredible places. Laura Beavin-Yates is a cognitive psychologist turned marketing leader at Immersion, a platform that uses neuroscience and wearable tech like your Apple Watch to measure how deeply people engage with and respond to experiences in real time. In today's episode, Laura takes us through her fascinating journey from academia to working with major brands like Google and Procter & Gamble, all while using cognitive psychology to revolutionize marketing strategies. She also shares how understanding the brain's neurochemicals like dopamine and oxytocin, for example, can transform the way we connect with people, both in marketing and in life. We also chat about how AI is helping brands communicate more authentically and why emotional connections are at the heart of consumer behavior. And if you're feeling the challenges of remote or hybrid work, Laura's got you covered with tools like the 6 app to help you build emotional well-being and psychological safety at work. I mean, who doesn't need a little bit more of that? If you're wanting to learn how to use cognitive science to better connect with your customers, your community, or yourself, this conversation will definitely blow your mind. Let's get into it. Laura, welcome to Girlboss Radio. We are so excited to have you here with us today. First and foremost, how are you feeling?
Feeling very good. Thank you. It's a little gloomy today, but still tried to bring the bright so that I can, energize it up a little despite the gloom.
I was hoping to understand a little bit more about your background. So can you share with us how you went from cognitive psychology to leading growth and marketing efforts at Immersion?
Yeah, so it's been quite the journey, and a nonlinear one, but also one that is connected, of course. My interest really was in understanding and studying memory when I first started grad school. And then I found myself in a place where the research that I was doing was very theoretical. We were doing behavioral observation, but I was really missing this piece that had tangible data to back up what was really happening from a brain perspective. And I happened to go to a lunch and learn, and the lunch and learn was this professor who was talking about the research that he was doing in his lab, the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies. And he's talking about this study that they did looking at trust and talking about how they were measuring predictors of trust by doing blood draws and looking at hormone change. And I was mind blown because when I originally applied for undergrad, my plan was to be a physiology major and to go pre-med, and everything kind of changed. I went and talked to him right after the lunch and learn, and I was like, I'm fascinated by what you're talking about. I'd love to learn more. And he said, well, come by and join a lab meeting and see if you're still fascinated. And if so, then let's talk about getting you into the lab. So ended up completing my PhD with him. This is Dr. Paul Zak. And ironically, he is actually the founder of the company that I work with now. But when I finished my grad school time, I thought I was going to go into academia to teach and do research. Right when I was nearing the end of my PhD, I realized, hey, I don't want to move to the middle of nowhere to fight to get an academic job, and academia is fantastic, but a little bit slow moving. So I found myself applying for jobs in research outside of academia. And that was really in the market research and neuromarketing world. And spent a few years in that, had a lot of fun, learned about a lot of new technologies that exist, but ultimately got a phone call from my grad school advisor, Dr. Paul Zach, after about 6 years of once I finished my PhD. And he said, hey, we started a company that actually uses some of the research that you were involved in when you were in grad school. We took all that work and we have now automated algorithms. We have a platform that uses neuroscience to predict behavior. That's when I paused and said, okay, sure, let's have a chat. And that was 8 years ago. And here I am today.
That's amazing. And I think that there's so many people that are probably listening to this conversation right now that went to school for something and they're probably not leveraging that education in a way that they would like. And I'm curious, like, what advice do you have for someone listening right now where they're like, okay, I have this really great educational experience that I invested in myself. I don't feel like I'm using it to the full capabilities and I want to do more with that. What advice do you have for those people?
I love that question, Avery. I mean, I speak to so many people who have had nonlinear journeys. And even today, if someone asks me, what do I want to be when I grow up? That's a hard question to answer. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I have core things that drive me. I want to help improve lives. I love data. I know all these things about myself that I've really learned over time. The thing I think to keep in mind is when you create a foundation of education, you learn the core pieces that you continue to build on over time. So while you may not feel like you're applying the things that you learn, you probably are in many ways. And then number two, there's always an opportunity to upskill and grow and to find unique ways to apply learnings that you may have built through a foundation of political science, education, psychology that you can apply into any role that you're doing. Because again, the goal of school and education is to build a foundation that you can continue to grow from. The last thing I'd also say, Avery, is that you can always make changes in your career path. I speak to so many people. I mean, I went from market research to, customer success. I led our customer success team when I first joined the company, now to growth and marketing. And I haven't been classically trained in any of those. I've taken kind of bits of learning along the way and have the foundation of data, which I would say is my kind of passion and love that I've been able to apply in various ways. So my suggestion is kind of find those nuggets that you can apply in that you're probably already applying, but also look for opportunities where you can always fold in the multidisciplinary experience to what you're doing now.
That's incredible advice. It's so interesting. My first kick at post-secondary education was in marketing and broadcasting television. And
that's so awesome.
It was specifically broadcasting television. And then I dropped out and then I went to school for marketing. And then like many, many years later, I ended up going to school for HR. And now it's like by some weird miracle, I'm leveraging all of the educational experience.
Right.
Like as a founder, I'm leveraging like what I learned about marketing, which by the way, that was like probably the worst degree because everything has changed since then.
Changes. So fickle.
when I went to school, like Instagram, I don't want to age myself. Instagram, TikTok, none of these things existed. So that
do you remember Friendster? I remember Friendster, like the very first. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's still on MSN Messenger.
I love it. I mean, that's the reality of it though. And it's funny because I have so many conversations with people who about growth and marketing. I'm not, and I say always, I'm not a classically trained marketer, but I'm a data girl. And what I know is I use data to make decisions, especially in a startup where it's agile, things are changing all the time. We really have to adapt. Data is like my guiding North Star. So, I feel like you can again pull those pieces in and figure out by asking questions and being curious and using resources around you, it all somehow comes together.
Yeah. So going back to your experience in psychology, like how does your background in cognitive psychology shape your approach to marketing? I'm very curious about this.
Yeah. So it's interesting, Avery, because psychology, a lot of people, when they hear psychology, they assume someone who has a degree in psychology has gone to school to become a therapist or that they just got that undergrad. So I went to school specifically to study research and better understand humans and how they make decisions and how our brain really guides us. I joke that also, not to age myself, neuroscience was not a very common degree when I was applying for undergraduate, and even applying for graduate school, it wasn't really on my radar. So cognitive psychology is really kind of what I would say the kind of closest thing in that psychology realm to neuroscience, because cognitive psychology is all about focusing on how the brain processes different things, how decision making works, how memory works, how all of our cognition in essence works. But when it comes to, how does that apply to marketing? It's interesting because there are so many cognitive elements or so many factors of like how we process things as humans that we don't understand consciously, that we're completely unaware of. We think that we make decisions rationally and that we calculate things, but the reality is there are so many things happening at the minute second level that we're not aware of. And all of those things drive our decision making. So when I think about marketing, I think about what are some of the decision making fallacies that people have? Are we conveying something that has an emotional hook? Because at the end of the day, what we really as marketers have to do is break through the noise, speak to someone in a way that connects to them, where they can see themselves in it. So I try to kind of use these principles of what cuts through and what connects and kind of embeds that memory, and what we know drives behavior and what doesn't.
What are some key things that you find that are driving behavior on, let's just say, on Instagram?
It depends somewhat on the industry and who you're targeting and all that good stuff, right? We're unique humans. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. And that's why I love the brain, because it drives us, right? So broadly speaking, I mean, content that shows humans versus content that doesn't show humans tends to connect better, because again, as humans unconsciously, we're looking to see ourselves in content. We're looking to see ourselves represented by brands who are trying to speak to us. So sending these kind of small signals where you demonstrate that you are representing or speaking directly to your audience, signaling that you hold similar values. Inherently, as humans, we're looking for these ways that we align with people and that we connect, and we're looking for kind of group membership signals. For us, we had to grow our social media account from zero when I took it over a year ago. And what we figured out is when we share interesting information about the brain or the body, and educate people on things that are part of them, right? These are things that make us drive every day, that impact how we, as each individual human, interact with the world. Like those things, thinking about what keeps people up at night, what problems do they have? Speak to the things that matter to them, not that matter to you. So I think it's just thinking about that kind of self-awareness, and again, how do you break through in a way that you're speaking to a human? And there are some broad strokes, but usually it can be brand-based too.
I know that you've worked with brands like P&G and Google on messaging, and specifically the messaging challenges that they've had. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned doing that work?
The company that I work for, Immersion, we have a B2B side of our business where we help brands, businesses, content creators, experience creators measure their content using neuroscience in order to understand if they are emotionally connecting with their audience. And there are some really interesting elements, like some learnings that are really kind of across the board, where we know, first of all, from the peak end rule, people tend to remember peak experiences and what happens at the end of an experience. So if you have an advertisement, for example, and you have a peak moment and our metrics, we highlight these peak neural moments when your brain is all in and fully absorbing info. If you have a peak moment and your branding isn't happening in correspondence with the peak moment, now Google and P&G, obviously bigger brands that are very well known, but at the same time, if they don't get credit for an ad that they're doing, for example, because the branding doesn't happen at a place where the emotional journey has the viewers all in, then they're not going to get attribution actually for that content, right? So number one, just making sure that when you're presenting key information that's important that you want your audience to take away or remember, or that they're going to activate at some later point, Make sure it's happening at a point when your audience is emotionally all in and connected. How do you know that? It's hard to know if you're not measuring it, right? Now, again, Google's and P&Gs have created entire rules and things that they create their ads by, but we're an evolving society. We're evolving humans. So it's important to understand that what's happening in the world right now is very different even than a week ago. So that's one of the things that for me, it's measure it so you understand if it's going to succeed before you put billions of dollars behind a Super Bowl ad. End strong and make sure you're communicating key info on those peak moments.
So let's just say we have someone that's listening and they are a marketer at a small business. What advice do you have for people that don't necessarily have the resources to test these types of marketing efforts before they go out live?
So a couple of tips. Number one, there are definitely some guidelines again by which you can go. Use your past data to understand and to guide you. If you're not looking at past data and how things have performed, you're missing, right? I have worked in early stage startups for the past 8 years and we are scrappy. So I get it. I'm part of a women in tech and entrepreneurship group where it's all small business people. I will say, and this is, I'm always happy to chat strategy and things like that because I find joy in being able to help smaller companies. But again, use your data to guide you. And there are actually tools out there that do let you test things easily without paying a lot of money. A little bit of a shameless plug, but this app that we've released recently actually does have a way by which you can invite other people to share their real-time neurologic reactions to content that you've created. So you can get those scores for free. You could gut check it with, friends and family. If you have an audience of followers who are kind of all in or customers who are your VIP customers, there are ways that you can actually get feedback from them on maybe things that are going to cost you a lot. So when you think about what is the spend or what's the risk that's involved, then there are actually ways where you can potentially test those things for free or super cheap. So I'd say think about and keep open to innovative tools. And again, AI solutions now are coming out that make it easier to test those. But if it's a risky scenario where you're putting a lot of budget behind it, there are ways that you can test it actually for a much more affordable manner than having to go to a big company or something like that.
And that actually leads me to my next point. I wanted to ask you to talk to us a little bit about 6-App. How does it actually measure well-being and interaction in real time?
I mentioned when we first started talking that my graduate degree it involved basically understanding decision making. And where we started academically, we had no idea we'd be where we are now. We wanted to understand, is it possible to measure something physiologically that allows us to actually predict whether someone is likely to make some decision? And that initial study basically involved having people come in. We did a blood draw to look at base levels of hormones. Then we had them watch a video, very sad video, father talking about his son with terminal brain cancer, just horribly sad. Did another blood draw, and then we asked them to report their emotions and, did they have empathy for the father, et cetera. And right before they left, we said, okay, gave them a little piece of paper. It said, hey, would you like to donate some of your hard-earned money to the organization that made that video? And Avery, what we found is that what people said they felt from the video, zero ability to predict whether or not they donated. What actually mattered was the release of 2 neurochemicals that also circulate in the body as hormones, dopamine and oxytocin. Dopamine, important for attentional resources. Oxytocin is really where we see this variation. The people who released oxytocin and those who released more of it were more likely to donate, and the more they released, the more they donated. That was the foundational study for our platform that measures content and experiences. And because what we identified is that we can detect these moments when people's brains are all in, fully connected, and storing information to memory, marking it as significant and meaningful and worth saving for later and worthy of making decisions around, right? So fast forward to about 2 years ago, we were doing a study. And again, we'd really only focus on the B2B side of things. We were doing a study actually with a telecommunications company that wanted to understand, is there a way actually to do a continuous measurement of our metrics? And are there any benefits to something like that? So they did this in a retirement facility and monitored older individuals over the course of a few weeks with our measures. And what we found is that we could actually predict mood and energy up to 2 days in advance using our continuous measures. Now that study, combined with the fact that on the B2B side, anytime anyone would participate in sharing their anonymous real-time data for, measuring experiences and content, people kept coming to us and saying, this is really cool. I love that I'm able to share my reactions with these people who created this content, but I want to see my data outside of that. So that ask combined with then seeing, and we have peer-reviewed research around these well-being implications, we decided to create what is called the 6 app. And we created the 6 app and called it 6 because we also have research that shows we need as humans 6 of what we call these key moments when the brain and the body are flooded with dopamine and oxytocin every day in order to have emotionally fit lives. Lives where we're thriving, lives where we are balanced. So we're helping people surface these kind of hidden interactions and experiences that are creating these neurologic key moments that are helping us thrive so that people can really curate their day to have more of those.
I'm really curious to understand, how does the 6 app help users to take control and take more ownership over their psychological safety?
So we have 2 key metrics. As I mentioned, we started with looking at these neurochemical and hormone changes by doing blood draws. We basically got challenged by the US government to see, is there a way that we can scale this and be able to measure these brain states without having to stick people with needles? So we went to work and tested every methodology we could get our hands on because we didn't know what would allow us to be able to measure this happening in real time and also, again, predict that future decision making. And what we did find actually is that the thing that matters for us is being able to observe these small nuanced changes in cardiac rhythm over time. It's not about faster or slower. It's not heart rate variability. There's actually a very distinct pattern because when dopamine and oxytocin release in the brain, it binds to the cranial nerve and that innervates the heart and changes the way that our heart beats. We have a mobile app that is the 6 app. It pairs with everyday smartwatches and fitness sensors. So the beauty is it pairs with a device that you might be wearing already, right? We have Whoop devices, we've got the Apple Watches, we have Fitbits, et cetera. So our goal for the 6 app is to be a passive tool that allows you to continuously measure those moments again every day when your brain and body are thriving. What the app does is it actually surfaces what we call key moments. And let's see, I can potentially pull it up here. So it surfaces what we call key moments. And then it timestamps those key moments. And you can actually then go in and edit them, label them, so that then over time you understand, again, the things that are really helping you thrive. Now, we have 2 key measures. You asked Avery about psychological safety. One of our measures is really this kind of brain state where we're all in and fully connected to an experience. The way I like to describe it is our brain is like a resource budget allocator. So our brain only weighs 3% of our body, yet it takes up to 30% of our body's resources as it's processing. And what that means is that attending to something is really costly. So think of the brain as I've got these resources, I am holding them in and budgeting them and choosing where to expend them, right? So one of our measures that funnels into those key moments is value. We talk about it as neurologic value and my brain actually getting value from this exact moment. And that actually helps us to decide, again, whether we mark it as significant. The other measure that we look at is psychological safety. And you can think, for anyone who's not familiar, think of psychological safety as the inverse really of anxiety. Psychological safety is like this comfort and confidence that we feel when we're interacting with people, when we're in a new scenario. It's the extent to which, again, you have like high versus low anxiety is a simple way to describe it. But Avery, I'll pause because I know you've done a lot kind of in the psych safety space or are really interested in it. So I want to make sure I'm answering all the questions that you have.
Yeah, no, you definitely are. I could listen to you talk about it all day. I think that psychological safety is a really important topic for people as we think about the workplace. And that was something that I wanted to talk about with you, because I know that the 6 app is something that people have been leveraging to support them and having a little bit more control and agency over it. One thing I will say is that I think that a lot of individuals expect for organizations to take on full responsibility for psychological safety. And I think that that's a much easier experience to manage on an individual basis. And of course, organizations are responsible to cultivate environments that are prioritizing psychological safety. But I don't think that it's possible to have it as like a collective shared experience that is in that state of like optimal psychological safety for everyone all the time.
Right.
In perpetuity. I just don't think it's possible.
Yeah, no, because we're all individual. We all bring our own baggage, right? Like, how would you do something like that? And, it's interesting, Avery, because I completely agree that it shouldn't be the organization's sole responsibility to own psychological safety. I do think, obviously, as leaders, as organizations that are creating cultures, it's very important to make sure that you are doing what you can to create an inclusive, supportive culture and space, especially again for team leaders, where you make it very clear to your team that it is okay to share your opinions. It's okay to challenge other people's thoughts as well, as long as you're doing it respectfully. The goal of having a psychologically safe space is that you can really unapologetically come and be and share your ideas. But to your point, Avery, psychological safety is also something that we as humans have the ability to manage, I'll say. So I don't want to say control, because that's something that, control, I think, is an intense word to use in this scenario. We have the capacity to set ourselves up for success when it comes to psychological safety. And we can also garner scenarios where our safety may not be as high as learning opportunities. And I'll give an example. But ultimately, if we come to work when we aren't well slept, not getting enough sleep is absolutely a variable that can have an impact on psychological safety. If I'm not doing what I need to try to bring my whole self, then that's a challenge where, nothing the workplace can necessarily do can help the fact that I didn't sleep well the night before, right? So that's where I think this tool can actually help individuals recognize, hey, my mood and energy in 2 days is actually projected to be very low. I need to make sure I'm doing the things today in order to drive up my psychological safety and my neurologic value, and giving myself those moments that I'm able to fully connect to conversations or work I'm doing, sign off at the reasonable time and cook dinner with your partner, or play a game with your family, etc. Now, the learning element here, so we have two measures, as I mentioned, value and psychological safety. Value, again, brain being all in and fully absorbed. And you can, in some cases, see that value is really high, but psychological safety is low. Those are growth opportunities. So a good example, I'm not trained in website development or design. I had to completely overhaul our website, which is set up through HubSpot. So it's a GUI, it should be something fairly easy, but it was a challenge. And I was measuring myself using 6 while I was doing this work. And I saw that I got key moments, my brain was all in, but my psychological safety was so low because it was something new. But the value shows me that this is a good thing for me to continue to work on. And as I get better over time, my psychological safety is going to rise with that. So this is a tool that lets you kind of measure and maintain that, so you understand it and have a pulse check. And then you can actually actively change course if you need to in order to show up better in the future.
Exactly. If you know that 2 days your psychological safety is projected to not be in the best state, then it might make sense to move out the annual review with your boss. It might make sense to be a little bit more mindful about having a completely stacked back-to-back day with meetings.
Right.
So I'm curious, how does Immersion address psychological safety for remote and distributed teams? Because I know that this is a big issue for organizations that are taking on more hybrid work styles. Yeah,
that's a great question, Avery. We've done a lot of work on the B2B side with the with teams and psychological safety. And actually, we did some work with a couple teams after COVID looking at return to office and psychological safety. And it was really interesting because you saw a very big difference both in value from meetings and things like that, as well as psychological safety, when it was scenarios where you had kind of, some are in office, some are not in office. Now, not to say our entire team has been fully remote, and we measure our psychological safety, we measure our value through everything we do, and we have very high value meetings remotely. But it is important to understand, are there scenarios where kind of differences in environments? If you have remote teams and in person, how do we do our best to really get these on kind of the same level and make sure everyone is walking away with the same successful outcomes, I'd say, from those kinds of environments, right?
So let's just say someone's listening right now and they're like, I don't ever feel psychologically safe at work. How can the 6 app potentially help them? Is there a way to move out of feeling that lack of psychological safety?
Yeah, there absolutely is, Avery. And it takes work over time. So what the 6 app does is it lets you see day over day, hour over hour, I can go in and look at my levels right now. I can look back at my levels last week. Ultimately allows you to understand and have an objective measure of psychological safety, because oftentimes as humans, we do these quick pulse checks, but we don't pause to reflect on those pulse checks. Right. So especially, I know, like, both of us being busy, I have back-to-back meetings also today. And it's one of those things where it's like, how do you take time to actually pause and reflect? So what the 6 app does is it helps people actually look at their data and recognize those different experiences that are enabling them to have higher psychological safety and really kind of open up and feel comfortable and confident versus those scenarios that aren't. That's the first place, is understanding what is really helping you thrive and what is not. Now, it doesn't mean that you can just completely blow off all the meetings with, Sally that happen every week and you have low psychological safety. But what it can also help you understand is, okay, I know that every time I meet with Sally, my psychological safety is low. What can I do that I have control over, where I can actually go out, take a walk, get myself in a safe, comfortable, feeling confident space that will help to carry over into the meeting? And then, of course, if you do see that you have those patterns with distinct people, if it continues, thinking about what is it about this particular meeting that's causing my psychological safety to be low? My suggestion, Avery, would be look at it on a case-by-case basis, find those things, those trends, and then take it almost like habit forming, right? So ultimately changing your own feelings about things. Now, it can be environmentally based and you only have so much control there, but the things you do have control over, recognizing them and then making a decision that I'm going to work on my levels of psychological safety when I meet with Sally. If you've assessed the situation and it's something that you feel like you can come in stronger for, right? And then starting with that. And then next, looking at the next item, because really what we're doing when we look at that data and then we work to implement change is that we're changing the way our brain is wired. So that over time, we go less to this default mode of feeling not psychologically safe given other outside or external life circumstances.
And I think it's so empowering to encourage people to realize that they actually have a lot more control over their psychological safety than they think, and that they can be in environments that perhaps promote a lack of psychological safety for them and perhaps others, but they can get more agency over that. And I think that the challenge is that when people have talked about psychological safety, for the most part, they're talking about other people influencing your experience versus encouraging people to take ownership of their own. So very quickly, like earlier in our conversation, you talked about the 6 key moments that elevate well-being. Do you mind just sharing what those are for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, key moments are something that our app is actually surfacing for each individual, because a key moment for me may be different than a key moment for you, Avery, right? And that's where one of the things that we recognized when we started talking about creating the 6 app is that there are so many tracking apps out there. There are so many well-being tools. There's your meditation tools. There's your self-care tool. There's your journaling tool. Guess what? Meditation doesn't work for everyone. Journaling doesn't work for everyone. But what we want to do is identify for you personally what are creating these key moments when your brain and body are flooded with oxytocin and dopamine, because having 6 of those daily is important for your well-being, your long-term well-being, your mood and energy in the future. So it's really about, again, we surface the things that personally are helping you thrive that sometimes might be things that you're aware of. I know I like to cook, but being reminded that I get a key moment every time I cook with my husband, it forces me to prioritize that. If I'm choosing between one more email or signing off so I can cook with him, I'm going to sign up and cook with him.
So you already mentioned some of the things that work for you around daily activities that you engage in to help to reach those peak moments that you talk about for folks. What are some things that you know based on the research and the data that you have that really work for like most people? Maybe not all people, but most people.
Yeah.
What are the popular, like the top picks?
Yeah. So it is very personal, like I said. So, but I'll tell you some of the things that we've been hearing from people. So cooking, surprisingly, I'm surprised at how many people have said, yeah, like cooking, I've got a key moment. For me, listening to music in the morning when I'm getting ready, and and it's crazy. It's that tiny little thing, right? That you wouldn't even necessarily think about. People interacting with their kids, playing games with their kids, time with animals, being outside. There's a lot of different things. Getting into a flow state if you're doing, something that you're really happy doing and allowing yourself and your brain to be all in, those can create these key moments as well. But the beauty really is, again, identifying what works best for you, because we all are such individuals and, unique in what makes us thrive.
I think that is a great place for us to end this conversation. I feel like you're one of those guests that I could talk to for hours and hours and hours. I tried
really
to fit
enjoyed this
as much as I could into this conversation so everyone could just borrow from your brain for a little bit.
Yeah,
but for folks that want to continue to follow along on your journey, the 6 app, of course, Immersion, where can they find you?
Yeah. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, it's Laura Beavin-Yates. So I'm always happy to connect with people and, again, share tips, strategies, also just have fun chats. I am a connector, so I love to talk to new people. When it comes to our 6 app, you can find our website is your6, your6.com. And you can find us on all the social channels under the 6 app. And if you're interested on the B2B side, you can find us at www.getimmersion.com.
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing your brain and your thoughts and your perspectives with us, Laura. I so appreciate
so much
it.
Fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I had a blast.
And that's a wrap on my conversation with Laura. After our interview, she emailed us and said that the 6 app captured a key moment where her psychological safety levels increased. And she said it was because of how comfortable she felt in our conversation. How cool is that? Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one insight from today's episode that you're excited to apply? Send us a DM on Instagram at Girlboss Radio and let us know. If you want to dive deeper into the tools and concepts we discussed today, like the 6 app or the work happening at Immersion, head to the show notes for all the links and resources. Tune in next week for another episode with a very special guest. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow the show, leave us a 5-star rating, and share a review. As always, this podcast is produced by Victoria Christie and Camilla Nizio and edited by Diego Domine. Until next time, keep blooming.